Great to have our very own Marilyn Blair here, author, international author now. It's over in Japan. It's all over the place, the book. So most of you know me. I'm Scott Fisher. I have the privilege of being a pastor here at Delaware Valley Christian Church. I'm going to give a little bio on Marilyn because we don't want to assume. Most people here know Marilyn, but there might be things you don't know about Marilyn. So I'm going to read a little bio of Marilyn, and our goal tonight is we're going to have a nice conversation together about the process of how Marilyn got into the writing. I'm going to try to avoid spoiler alerts about the books. I have read both of these books. Excellent. Highly recommend them. See Kimmy over there if you'd like a copy. But I will try to avoid saying anything about what happens in the books, okay? So some of you haven't read them maybe yet or whatever. So anyway, well, Marilyn. Marilyn was an educator for over 20 years, starting her career as a music teacher. After earning her master's degree, she spent the next 10 years as a language arts teacher and reading specialist. Marilyn has published 2 novels, has written for both secular and religious organizations, and has been asked to speak to various groups. In August, she received the Pacesetter Award at the Write His Answer Christian Writers Conference. This year, she also assisted several writers in independently publishing their own works, and just last week, her publishing company released a devotion book by a new author. In 1974, a little while ago, a friend invited her to DVCC, Delaware Valley Christian Church, where you are right now. And in 1975, she joined the church. Next year, she'll be celebrating 50 years of membership. Amazing. And we appreciate Marilyn and Jim and their family, their anchors here. She has served in various capacities. I think it'd be easier to say what capacity hasn't she served in, but that's okay. During her time here, and currently is serving as communications director and member of the worship team. Marilyn is married to Jim. I'm reading what I have here. Also known as the husband. Or the bear. They'll be celebrating their 40th anniversary next year. Marilyn and Jim have 2 daughters, Holly, who is currently living in Japan with her husband Dylan, and Kimberly, who's with us tonight. So that's just a little bit about Marilyn. Now we're gonna chat together and have some time for interaction, but you can listen in on that. But then we are gonna have opportunity for you to ask some questions. So you may be thinking of some questions that you might want to ask.
Careful, you two.
And we'll shut it down real quick if we get time here. All right. All right.
Something at the last book signing.
Yeah. All right.
As soon as I raised my hand, she went, "Oh no."
So Marilyn, let's just get started with have you always? You've written 2 books, 2 novels actually. There's another third one, right? You've actually written 3, but that's nothing. Have you always been a writer? Is that something you've always done, or is it something that you've always sort of had an aspiration, like to do what you've been doing?
No.
So tell us about that.
No, absolutely not. No, I never really wanted to be a writer, never thought about being a writer. When I was little, I wanted to be a teacher or a Broadway star. I did become a teacher. So it was never something that really was on my mind to do. And when I look back at all the things I have done, though, writing has always been an element of it. Even when I was working at the mall, they had me writing things there. So with my very first job, all the way through to now serving as communications director, obviously there's writing that goes along with that. So it's kind of been a thread in my career, but certainly not storytelling. It's been more information gathering and repackaging it and putting out there, but not. No.
So what prompted you then to start writing? And how recently did this start? And then what prompted you to start doing this?
Yeah, it was it was a total God thing. We'll just put that right out there because it was about a year after Jim and I had moved to Lancaster, and we moved in the middle of COVID, and there wasn't a lot to do. So the first year we were there, we were basically painting the house and unpacking and just kind of getting settled in. And we'd been there about a year, and it was pretty much done all I felt like doing. And so I had a lot of time on my hands. And I thought, this would be a good time for a challenge. And what I meant by that was when I retired early to help out with some family things. And my biggest concern at the time was that I would become a boring person, that I wouldn't have anything to talk about. So I intentionally said every so often I'm just going to do something really random that would just get me to think in a different way, or I get to have a different experience. You know, nothing crazy like jumping out of an airplane or climbing a ladder. It would just be something different, you know. So I would take a class, or I'd visit something, or, you know, learn something new. So that's what I meant when I said that day. I was like, yeah, this would be a good time for a challenge. And like that, I had this idea to write a fiction novel. And I went, that's the craziest idea I've ever had. I thought it was stupid crazy. Like, nah, what in the world? Because at that point, I was really tired of writing. I was looking for ways to get out of writing. And so that was one problem. The second problem was that it was to write a fiction story. And I wasn't even reading fiction. My go-to for pleasure reading is history and biographies, presidential biographies. Thank you, Mr. Lincoln. So the idea of me writing a fiction novel was just like, no. So I just kind of, next. And that idea would not leave me alone. For 2 weeks straight in my head, all I'm hearing is write a fiction novel, write a fiction novel, write a fiction novel. And so after about 2 weeks, I very maturely one day said, okay, fine, I'll give it a shot. And I said, but here are the rules. This story only has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has to make sense. It doesn't have to be good. And I'm not going to plan. I'm just going to sit down and write. And for most of you know me, that is like totally the opposite of my personality, not to plan. I plan everything. So for me to say that's kind of where my mindset was. But looking back in that now, and now that it's been a couple years, so this has only been maybe 3 years that this has been going on. Looking back in that, I go, that is the genius of God. Because if I had said, okay, I'll do that, you know, and was like on board right from the beginning, I would have sat down at my computer, I would have planned out the book, I would have planned out every paragraph, I'd know how it would start and how it would end. But because I went, I'm not going to do that, it just opened up all these possibilities of what could happen. And really what it did was allow God to work in me in that, you know, it allowed him to inspire and direct the whole story, where, you know, the other way, it would have just been a closed door.
Which is something that, you know, whether someone is interested in writing or some other thing, what God was working into you to, in a sense, would you say, step out of your comfort zone, right? Would you say?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So it was a step of faith for you to do it. When you started doing it, you talked about you didn't want to become boring. You didn't want to like have your life stagnate. Did you have like a purpose in mind as far as like an audience for the book, or any kind of thought of like what you're going to write this book? It sounds like a lot of it you were writing for your own sort of processing. Yeah. And so what was your thought about
that? Initially, I mean, so I have the one book that I rarely talk about because it's not published, and it's not going to be published. But that was the first book that only had to have a beginning, middle, and an end. So when I was writing that, my intent was no one was going to read that book. I was just it was just to get that thought out of my head and be done with it. And, you know, and then I figured that was going to be the end of it. And obviously that didn't happen. But by the time, it really took like a year and a half before I understood there was purpose to this, and that it wasn't my idea to write the fiction novel, you know, and that all this other stuff, that there really was purpose to what God was saying in that. But once that book was done and I knew, okay, I see it, God, and now I'm going to write a book that is going to be published, I did sit down and think about, okay, well, what, you know, who is this for? What should it look like? And I really only had a few things that I wanted to include. I wanted it to be written about people my age. So I'm 65. I wanted it to be older adults, late 50s into their mid 60s, 70s. because when I look at literature or movies or television, I don't see that age group as the primary characters. We're usually on the fringes, and when the way we're portrayed frequently, I don't care for that, because it's not what I see. When I look at my age group, that's not what I see. And so I wanted to write what I see, first of all. So I wanted that, and I also wanted to have a faith element that weaved its way through.
Okay, awesome. All right, so let's shift gears a little bit. How did you come to Eastport? Like, because it's obviously the Eastport Series.
Eastport Series,
book
yeah.
1, 2, and then I think there's another book.
There's I'm working on 3 right now.
Yeah. So tell us about that, Eastport, how that came about, and so just go ahead and tell us about that.
So Eastport's another God moment. So I knew I'd need a place, and one of the things I really wanted to do in the books is to root them in reality. I wanted it to feel like, oh, I could actually go to this place, or these could be my neighbors, or I understand these problems that these people are dealing with. I didn't want it to be some, far-fetched kind of thing. So, and to me, when I thought about how's the best way to make it feel real, was to pick a real place. I didn't have any ideas for the novel, what it was going to be about, any of that, but I did have the opening sentence, and I got that from posting. I collect sentences and phrases, anything that I think is interesting or inspiring or funny. And I had this little collection, and I thought, if I could just get the first sentence, I think I could write the rest of the book, which sounds crazy, but that's where my mind was. And so I went to my little collection, and I took out about 5 sentences that I thought would work. And then I did what any reasonable person would do. I posted on Facebook. And I said, okay, I'm going to write this book. Here are my 5 choices for a first sentence. Vote on the one that you think is the most interesting, and the one that gets the most votes, that'll be the first sentence in book number 2. And the sentence that won was, that looks like about 10 miles of bad road. Let's take it. And so even though I only had that sentence, it came with about 1,000 questions. Who said it? I'm thinking it sounds like the main character. I know she's a woman. Okay. What's her name? What's she look like? Where's she from? What's she do for a living? Does she like what she's doing? Where is she going? Because she's on a bad road. She's about to take a bad road anyway. So when I said, where's she going? Eastport just popped in my head. And Jim and I, the girls, had been to Eastport 12 years prior. I hadn't thought about Eastport for about 12 years, but it just popped in my head. And immediately after that, a movie started playing. And when I say movie, it's like Technicolor, beautiful movie, clear as a bell. And I'm seeing what we did. And I see us driving down what I now know is Washington Street, making a right on Water Street, which is the street that runs next to the bay. And I see the diner, and I see, this museum, and I didn't know it was a museum at the time. And there's a banner going across the way that says something about a festival, and that they're the easternmost city in the United States. And just all the things that we had done on that vacation came back to me. The other thing you need to know about me is I don't remember things like that at all. Jim will ask me, he's like, oh, do you remember we went to so-and-so? Kinda, and he can prompt me, and eventually I'll get there, but I don't remember it as clearly as I was getting at. And actually, the movie's playing in my head right now. It's like the weirdest thing. As soon as somebody says Eastport, it just starts playing. So that's really how it happened. And then I thought, oh, okay, that sounds like a interesting playground to explore. So I went with it, and then I had no idea.
So from that point on, I know you've gone up there numerous times to Eastport, and which is in Maine, for those that probably already figured that out, and it's the easternmost city in Maine. Maura and I actually were up there this summer when we went away for our anniversary. Stopped and had dinner, and it was awesome. Having read the books and stuff. So it's a real place.
It's a real place.
I expected to meet some of the characters from the book. But so tell us about that, like how the research you've done there and how you use that to write, and the interactions you've had with people.
Yeah, it's been fun. So Eastport is a real place. It is the actual easternmost city in the United States. It's tiny. It's about 12 miles square, but 8 of those miles are in the water. So it's really only 4 miles long, and it feels like Peter Pan when I describe it, because it's the second island to the right. So you have the mainland, and then you go over a causeway, there's a little island, another causeway, and then Moose Island. Where is Moose Island is where Eastport's located, and it's on the easternmost tip of that island. So it's just this little bitty tiny place. Downtown, I would say, is similar to Media. It's probably a little smaller, when you say.
I think so.
And it's really only one side of the street
Yeah.
than both sides of the street. So it's just this little bitty place. The first thing I did was I went on Google Maps and I did the, what's it called, the street view, where you can drive down the street. And I drove down just about every street I could virtually in Eastport. And I picked out specific places where I wanted things located. So in Iris and Mo, there's only about, I think, 4 places that aren't actual, that are fictitious. So it's Iris's house, Frank's house. The one that upsets everybody is the Sunrise Inn is not a real inn. You can't go stay there. I wish I could too. And the church that they attend, those are all not real. However, where they're located is. So if you took the book with you and walked down the street, you could figure out where these places are. The same is true in A Good Place to Turn Around. Part of it takes place in Philadelphia. And every place they mention in Philly is a real place. Even Ben's house is an actual house. So you can go see which house it is. And if you're friends with me on Facebook or on the group page for the books, for a while the banner was actually Ben's house. It was the front of his house. So that's how the research started, just doing that. And then a lot of Google stuff. I connected with the Eastport Area Chamber of Commerce, their website, and I did a lot of jumping off from there. And then when I got to go to Eastport, I went with Sharon in May, and one of my favorite, this is my absolute favorite place to do research, is the Wacko Diner. Now the Wacko Diner is just this little bitty diner, but it's the oldest diner in Maine. It's 100 years old this year. And we went there for breakfast one morning, and we're in a booth, like 3rd booth in, and we're just in there chatting, and there's these men that are all sitting at the counter. So when you go into the restaurant, to your right is the counter, and to the left is just a row of booths. So there's 5 or 6 men sitting at this counter, and we're chatting, and I'm hearing something that just kind of, pricked my ear. And so Sharon went to say something, and I'm like, just wait. And I'm listening, and I pull out my little book, and I start writing, because they were talking about cruise ships that were coming into Eastport that is becoming a real asset for them, for the economy. And that they were having trouble with customs, because customs didn't have enough people to process all the people that were going to be coming in. So then when I went back in July, I was there by myself for about a week. Every morning at 7:10, I would walk down to the Wacko Diner, and I'd sit in the 3rd or 4th booth, and I'd wait. And about 5 minutes later, in come the men, one at a time or 2 at a time, and they'd sit down, and I'd pull out my little notebook, and I'd just wait and listen, and I just wrote. And what was great about that, half of what they said wasn't true, and the other half I couldn't really include in a book. It was a little salty, but what it did was give me a sense of what these people really are like, and how they speak to each other, and the kind of conversations that they have. And they were just hysterically funny. So I got to do that. I spent some time in the archives of the local paper. It's called the Quoddy Tides. I spent some time in the library doing some research there, and it's an ongoing, that's constant doing. So
cool. Another question is, and I think it's always interesting for someone that writes fiction, is what do you, having not written fiction before, what do you draw on to create your characters, in terms of because you have to deal with emotional issues and just the characters. You have to you're drawing them out of your imagination, but they're being drawn out of your life experience and stuff. So how does that where do you draw on for that?
Yeah, that's probably the biggest difference between all of the writing I had done before and this is that emotional component. I wasn't really prepared for that. I really hadn't thought about it. But what I realized, you know, by the end of really the first book, but really Iris and Mo, was I am really getting attached to these characters, you know, and for me, Mara laughs at me all the time because I'll start talking to her and she'll say, you know, you talk about them like they're real people. And I remember at the end of Iris and Mo, I finished the novel, it was pretty, it was up on Amazon, everything was great. And usually when I finish a project, I'm like, yay, you know, and I cross that off the list and, you know, I'm ready to start the next thing. And it wasn't like that. I was kind of bummed. And I'm like, after 3 days, I'm like walking around like Eeyore. And I'm like, what is going on with me? This is not normal. So I just kind of sat with it for a little bit in my office going, you know, why are you feeling this way? And I realized it felt a lot like when we moved out of the city to media. And I had to leave all my friends behind. I was in middle school at the time. And it was that same kind of lonely longing kind of for your friends. And I thought, well, that's really weird because these are not my friends. These are, you know they're fake because you made them up. And so that bothered me. And it also bothered me when I was writing that things would happen and I would get really upset. Like, oh my gosh, this terrible thing just happened. I'm like, you made it happen. I know why. So I really thought, do I need to speak to somebody about this, you know? And then it wasn't too much longer after that, I came across a quote, and I think it was Robert Frost, and I'll just paraphrase it. Basically said, if you are not laughing and crying, then neither will your readers be. And I went, oh, it's supposed to feel like that. And so then I really started looking at the characters and where did they come from? You know, am I just, they didn't feel like I'm just pulling them out of the air. And what I've come to believe is that every person I've ever met, everything I've ever done, every place I've ever been still lives in this noggin of mine. It's just all locked up and I don't always have the access code. But somehow when I'm writing, I do. And it's like a pantry. It just opens up. And it's like if you're going to make a cake and you take some, you know, this ingredient, that ingredient, you throw them in a bowl, mix them up, put it in the oven, and out pops a new creation. With the characters, it's very similar. So I'm like taking maybe a physical trait from this person I know, and a character trait from that person I know, an experience from that person I know, and all these other little pieces from all these other different people. They all get meshed up, and then out pops this new person. And so while the person itself is fictitious, what went into making it is real. So that's why I think for me, I go, I really do know these people. And when bad things happen to them, I do feel bad, like, especially when I cause them.
That's interesting because that, and I agree with like what that person said, because that's what gives the characters dimensions, right? If they're human, that gives them the humanness that comes through from your. And it might be a book you wouldn't have been able to write when you were 20 or 30, or it would have been a different kind of book. This is at a point in your life where you've had all these life experiences. When you were talking, I was thinking, I couldn't help but think of, for those who have seen the movie Castaway, I couldn't think Wilson. Remember Wilson?
Yeah.
And if you just give the volleyball, if you just give that without watching the movie, you'd say, that sounds absurd.
Yeah.
But when you watch the movie, you realize he's created this character that he's invested, right? So it's kind of like that, But that must really be a weird experience. I mean, to read a book and to know it's fiction and get attached to the characters, or watch a show and know it's fiction. You know, in order to, you know, they say that in order to enjoy art, right? You have to the willing suspension of disbelief. You have to. You can't keep saying to yourself, "This is only a book. This is only a movie."
Right.
But that's watching it. But actually creating it and then getting attached must be a really strange feeling. It's a very strange feeling. But to be detached and write would be like they're saying you can't really create a character if you're gonna constantly know this is not really, you know what I mean?
What happens is, so initially, like, you know, with Iris, say, When I'm writing her, I don't have a sense of who she is. And so initially, she's just words on a page. But somewhere along the line, and it's usually like a one-liner, somebody will say something, and then all of a sudden they're real, and I know who they are. And it's like they jump off the page and they come sit in my office, but most often they're sitting in my car, in my passenger seat, talking to me. And they'll talk to me all day, or 4 o'clock in the morning, they'll wake me up. Yes, I do.
Okay. All right, we have to have another session.
We have lengthy conversations. You know, there's so much to do with farm.
But here's the thing that's interesting to me, though, because to me that would be somewhat stressful in the sense that you have a tremendous amount of power. Because you're creating these characters. These are your characters.
Yes.
So you can make them say anything you want.
Anything I want.
So do you ever struggle with like, oh, do I really want to take this character in that direction?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, frequently.
Because, there's some stuff in there in your books where, unexpected real life type stuff where someone's certain personality traits come out that you weren't expecting, right?
Yes.
So that's...
I'm struggling that with, honestly, every book there's been a moment where I'm going, do
I really want to go this way?
Yeah, do I want to really do that? And yes, most of the answer's been yes. In the book I'm writing right now, it's a really difficult topic that starts the book, and I have rewritten that probably 20 times right now. Okay. And so it can be a real struggle.
I know like when they do shows and stuff, they have a group of writers and they probably debate this back and forth whether they want, but you're like
I'm debating with myself.
Okay, a couple other questions and I want to give other people a chance to ask. So as a Christian, how does you've sort of referred to it already, but how does your faith impact your writing? In other words, how does your faith get woven into the process, into the characters, and the stories you tell and that stuff?
Yeah, so the faith piece of it, it's really, I kind of see it in two ways. So one is so this whole thing started that it was not my idea. So I don't have a set, this is going to be my goal and this is where I want to get to. I don't have any of that. So the only thing I know is God's calling me to write. That's it. So how do I know to take this? What's the next step, and how do I know that's the next step? So there's that piece of it, and then the actual writing part of it. So I'm going to talk about that first, and then I'll come back to the other one. But in the writing, when I was, back with the beginning of Iris and Mo, and I was thinking about, okay, well, what thematically, what would I want these books to be about? And I kept coming back to, where do I belong? How do I find my place in the world? Which I would think on the surface, being 65 years old, that's not a question you're asking. That's something usually you're asking when you're in your 20s. However, when I turned 60, I found myself asking that question a lot because my 60s are very similar to my 20s, where there's this tumultuous change of, now I live in a new place, now I'm retired, now my kids are grown up and, moving away, living in Japan, and, so all this stuff is happening, and I'm going, well, what do I want to be when I grow up? I'm asking the same questions that I asked when I was 20. So for me, the beauty of age is, we're saying how we know different stuff now. I think I've really simplified this to where I have this umbrella of God's will. So how do I know God's will? What does God require of us but to act justly, love mercy, walk humbly with God? And Jesus tells us to love God, love others. So that's my umbrella I'm looking at going, okay, is the next step come under that umbrella? If the answer is no, it's easy. Then I know, don't do that. But then underneath that, I also have like another mini umbrella, and those are the things that I actually know. And what do I know? I know, number one, I have the Holy Spirit living inside of me. What's his job? To comfort and to guide. So I know I can rely on that. When you get that, you just know feeling, to me, that's Holy Spirit talking. I also know Jesus is right here. So he's gonna make sure I don't do anything really, really stupid, right? If I'm walking in concert with him. The other thing I know is, what has God called me to do in this moment? And he has made it very, very clear he wants me to write. And he's told me that in probably 20 different ways in the past couple of years. It's very clear to me. One of the few things in my entire life that has been this clear is that's what he wants me to do. So when I get an opportunity, say, like for example, over the summer, I was approached by a woman I've known for a couple of years now in the writing community. She's well-respected Christian woman, has this publishing company, and her goal is to help other Christian writers get published. And she's great. I really like this woman. Well, this summer she approached me about partnering with her in this publishing company. Now, on the surface, that sounds like, yeah, what an opportunity to be doing this. She knows all kinds of people. This could be a real good thing for me. So if I look at the big umbrella, act justly, love mercy, all that, does it fit under that? Well, absolutely, because that's her whole thing, is to, get God's people out there. But then if I go to the smaller umbrella and I go, well, what has God called me exactly to do? And that is to write. How's this fit in with that? Well, I know now from publishing 2 books already, if I get involved in something like that, where I'm not just doing my stuff, but now I'm doing maybe 3 or 4 or 5 other people's stuff, I'll have 0 time for writing. So even though it seemed like a really good thing and a God thing, the answer was no. Flip side, I also had an opportunity in August to speak at a conference, just 7 to 10 minutes. They only wanted me to talk about what it's been like to be an independently published author. And I thought, the idea of speaking wasn't really high on my priority list. But I went back to okay, does this fit under that umbrella? It's a Christian conference. Of course, it's going to fit under that big umbrella. But what has God called me to do? He's called me to write. Well, this is speaking. So, and then I thought, well, what do I have to do to be able to speak? I have to write. I went, interesting. So I said, okay. And I gave the talk in August, and then they got in touch with me and said, would you mind if we printed the transcript and this outgoing newsletter that's going? Okay, fine, I see. Yeah, so that's been a yes, and ever since that, yes, other opportunities of speaking has come along, and I do see how they fit, because I do write a lot to get prepared for whatever,
Awesome.
I'm gonna do.
Okay, great.
Did I answer both questions?
I think so,
You
yeah.
can't.
Oh, and no, within the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's just in life, in the books, how it works out, that faith element that goes through. I understand that. When I was looking about, okay, this is about belonging, that, where do I belong? I looked at that for me, the answer came in relationship. And so I thought of 5 different ways that in relationship of family, friendships, community relationships, love relationships, and our relationship with God. So we have these 5 threads that are just kind of weaving together to form this blanket of belonging that gets wrapped around each character. But generally there's at least one of those threads that's broken or knotted, and that's where the conflict in the story comes, and then that's where we can see how faith is played out in those relationships and how people are working through whatever conflicts coming along.
Okay, I just want to ask one more thing, and I want to let people ask questions. So, your audience for your books, my sense would be, it's not solely a Christian audience. You know what I'm saying? Like, there are some books you read, and it's pretty clear this is pretty much a book you would give a Christian to read. Yeah. My sense is your books the characters are broad enough and the stories are broad enough that your intention is, and you've had a lot of people, I'm sure, read it. So what kind of reaction or response do you, here we're speaking in a church, and not necessarily everybody here is a Christian per se, but maybe they are, but it's a church, right? This is your church, so this is a Christian group for the most part. What kind of reaction do you get to the faith elements of your book? Have you gotten any feedback on that?
Yeah, I have. It's been really good, actually. So there have been, several who, one of the things that people have liked is that it's not that in your face, kind of Christian book. But for me, so just to speak to that, my intent has always been that whenever faith comes up, it's internally driven by the story. It's not imposed on top of the story. And so for me, what that means is when faith is being discussed, it's because of something that's happened, and it's because of the beliefs of the people. And how it plays out is where they are in their spiritual journey. So, and they're all in different places. So that it's not everybody's a happy little Christian person in these books. You have some people, you know, Frank is in Iverson Moe. He calls himself a two-timer because he only goes to church twice a year. So you have him who acknowledges that there could be a God, but it makes zero influence on his life. Versus Ben, who we don't really get to know this about him in Iverson Moe, but in A Good Place to Turn Around, you find this man is a man of faith, and he's praying constantly. You know, he's just walking around going, well, Lord, that was a mess. What do we do now? You know, so you have these contrasting people. And I think what that does is for people who aren't really acclimated to faith, they can relate to that. And it doesn't seem threatening or fake, or, you know, it's not always the pastor, no offense, who's talking about faith, it's the characters. And so it's been something that people feel comfortable giving to other people, but other people who nobody gave it to them, they just out and out bought it themselves, have come back to me and said, yeah, I was really surprised actually. One person he come and said, I really like the faith element in this, and they weren't a faithful person at all, but so
I
really
think that makes a lot of sense, and having read the books, that, you know, you're right. I mean, it's integral to the characters, who they are, right? So it flows out of who they are, and you know, it's not like you said, just all of a sudden, we'll get the faith element. It's all part of it. So that's really awesome. All right. Well, I mean, I have hundreds of other questions I could ask, but I think I'm gonna open it up now for questions that you folks might have. So, yes, Carrie.
This is about the writing process. When you're really tired of it and discouraged, what encourages you?
Well, honestly, I think I've gotten to the point yet where I'm really tired. I've gotten to the point where I get frustrated. Like right now, it's the beginning of the writing process is the hardest part for me. Once it gets rolling, it's like, get out of my way, because I'm just writing all the time, because it's just in there and it just wants to get out. But like right now with book 3, it's really herky-jerky. And so what I frequently do is I'll work on it for a little while, and then I go do something else, and then I come back to it, and I go do something else, and I come back to it. So it's a lot of breaking up like that. But then being connected with other writers has been super helpful, because they've all gone through that, and they can say that's a normal thing, or, you know, just keep plugging away, or they'll give me some suggestions for how to solve that puzzle.
Where do you find your words to write? Because it's not
words?
like you're just plugging in your ideas. You have to have
the words. So I will talk about the dialogue words, because for me, so here's a fun fact that I did not know, but apparently for a lot of writers, dialogue is the worst part of them to write. I'm surprised at how many writers complain about that. For me, that's the easiest part. And I think it's because they're talking to me all the time and I'm just writing it down. So when I know who the character is, I hear their voice. So I literally, I mean, I'm not like hearing voices, but there's a distinction between Frank's voice and Ben's voice. I know who's talking to me. And even in A Good Place to Turn Around, there's 2 boys who are 10 years old, and they are distinct voices there too. So I'm not sure how to answer that other than I'm just listening. And right now I'm much more aware of words. So like just yesterday in Bible study, the teacher said something about being a professional forgetter. And I went, I love that. So I asked her afterward, do you mind if I use that in a book sometimes? Like, no, absolutely. So I'm writing down phrases that I see, or something might just hit me funny, and I'll write that down too, and then I just track it that way. I have my own little thesaurus that I've been building since I've been doing this. I mean, how many different ways can you say smile, or laugh, or look? You know, it's those are the difficult ones to come up.
you have to be guided by God
Mhm.
because the skill just to write and the way things come to you and how your character. I love her books, by the way. But I have another thing where you have you guys knock it off. I love that. It hit like you brought a little Philadelphia into it
Yes.
and how they speak. And my last questions, because you guys answered the other ones. Are you going to bring any of the characters from the other two books into your third?
Yes. So so how it goes is Iris and Mo is first. Iris and Mo is really about Iris. A Good Place to Turn Around is about Ben, who was in Iris and Mo. The third book is a prequel, and it's a prequel to Iris and Mo, and it's Frank's story. So when I finished Iris and Mo, I had 1,000 questions. Like, I wanted to know a lot. I wanted to know a lot more about Ben. I had lots and lots of questions about Frank, because there were things he did and said that I went, there's something else going on there. I want to investigate that a little bit more. And what's interesting with Frank's story, because it's a prequel, his story is really a 2-book tale. And so what you're going to get in his story is called Before I Go. And what you're getting from that is kind of his arc going up to that pinnacle. And then that's where Iris and Mo starts. And so then you get to see the aftermath, what happens after that. And so what I'm doing is pulling a lot of the things from Iris and Mo that Frank did and explaining them in Before I Go. It's a really, head tapper there, trying to keep all that straight. So of all the books, that one I would say I have a plan, but it's more like a timeline, because I have to make sure I'm explaining this in the right order in the time frame that exists.
Now, are you capping the series at 3 books?
No.
Because it sounds like, I want to say, if we're doing a prequel, we're going to need some more.
Yeah, no, there's
We're going to need some more, right? Yeah,
There's-
you're not going to do just 3.
No.
What's
There's
that?
a book for Emma. I thought about that. I don't know. Emma is, she's like the wise old oak tree. She's just the foundation of the books and of Eastport in a sense. And I don't know if I want to investigate her too much, because I don't want to take away from that aura of who she is. So I don't know. But there'll definitely be a book 4, because that book has been talking to me recently.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah, they won't leave me alone either. So I'm taking notes. I won't write it, but I keep taking notes. And if I do 4, I do want to do 5, because it just doesn't look right. I have to,
You really do
You need the phone. You need to
7 is the
phone.
biblical number.
Then it's complete, right? Yeah, so we'll see. But, they each take a while.
8 is
So.
enough. 8 is enough.
Yeah.
All right, anybody else?
Yeah.
Yes, Robert, go ahead.
Eight
If
is
you
enough.
go to 8, you gotta go to 10.
Let's keep going, right?
Yeah, we need 10.
How about a dozen? Isn't that right?
I'm getting too old for that.
Baker's dozen.
Yeah, that's where we go. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Was Frank the good one that was full of faith, or is he the?
Ben is Frank is the 2-timer, and Ben is the man of faith.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Yes. Oh.
Uh-oh. All right, we're going to be closing the meeting now.
Wait, I need a drink. Okay, go ahead.
I want you to put me in the book.
You are in the book.
I know, but I mean really put me in the book. And kill me. And then you don't have to kill anybody else. Okay?
She gets very upset when
I
you talk about
am
people.
very upset.
But-
I know, but even then,
No,
has everybody here read
not
Iris and Mo?
everybody's
Probably
read
not.
Iris and Mo.
No spoilers
No,
allowed.
all right, the
Okay.
first book.
Yeah.
The very first book that's not published. Yes, you can talk
You
about
killed
that.
everybody.
I did kill
So, no more, you know what I say.
Yes, I know
So
what
you
you say.
can put me in
It's not like
there.
my wife. She hates when people die off in church.
Yeah, and you can put me in there. Go ahead. No, and kill me. And slow.
Well, just so you know, I sleep with one eye open.
With the first book.
I'm sorry.
The first book, the one
Yes.
that's not published.
Yes.
Why did you come up with them? I absolutely could not put that book down because I identified with all of them.
Yeah,
Because I watched that show faithfully.
well, that's why it can't be published, because it's based on a television show.
Yeah.
And I didn't know. Kimmy explained to me later that I wrote fan fiction. I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah.
But I was just inspired by something somebody on that show said. So it's the same thing with Iris and Mo, where it was one sentence that got me rolling. It was the same thing on that show. Somebody said something, and I went, that's really interesting. And they just wrote the whole book. And it just kind of, that was like a whole weird experience. It just wrote,
I couldn't.
but
Yeah, it was a good book.
yeah, but I can't really publish it.
Yeah.
What I've been trying to do is take elements from it, and I'd really like to rewrite it, but it's so
Oh, don't
tied.
No, don't.
That's kind of where I'm
No,
sitting with it. It's just
don't,
going to be its
because
thing.
that book,
It's going to be like one of those books that's like, did you know that Marilyn Blair had written a book that was non-published?
Yeah.
I mean, it's even more valuable than
Yeah, and
because
if you
it's
have a copy,
unpublished.
there's only like
Yeah.
15 copies of them out there, which
In
I
100
would
years, when nobody remembers that show, then you can
Yeah.
publish it.
There you go.
that-
Were you really obsessed with Oak Island?
Oh no, I wasn't.
I watched it faithfully.
Me too. I watched it.
I
Yeah.
watched
Yeah,
that.
It's funny. I didn't come into
It's a
it
show
until.
on it. She can explain it.
Yeah, it's like the 5th season. It's on the History Channel. It's called the Curse of Oak Island, and it's like a treasure hunt show. Well, it is a treasure.
It's a
hunt
reality
Yeah.
show.
It's a reality show.
Yeah.
But I didn't come into like the 5th season, and because the title scared me. I always thought it was some scary show, and then I came into it like in the middle of the show once, and there was nothing going on. I just kind of so I watched. I'm like, oh well, that's interesting. I want to know what that shiny gold thing is, and so then I was hooked. So
Scary amounts of money they're wasting.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
But
what's
didn't
scary.
they actually did find the money almost where,
they haven't found, no, but it's funny. So I get a little sidetracked, but in this book, in my version of the book, they actually do find treasure.
Yes.
And where they're finding things right now is really close to where I
where she
said
said.
they were going to find. It's
And
very
that
weird.
was like,
Very weird.
All
how
right.
did she
You
know?
want to come look in my yard?
Yeah.
Sandy, do you?
Yeah.
I do, actually, like I'm thinking if I was to write, I would have trouble having anything bad happen to anyone.
Yes.
And part of me is thinking that you kind of allow it to happen because you're coming from that place of people wanting belonging and their characteristics, and that naturally leads to them having to face things they need to grow about.
Yes.
Is that part of it, or
Yes.
like how could you let bad things happen? to
Yeah,
you?
and this is where it gets dicey to talk about, because there's things that happen in Iris and Mo that had to happen. I looked for other ways to happen, to make it happen, so Iris would be in the place that she needed to be to heal that thread. And that was the only way it was going to happen. It was not just for her, but it was for other characters as well. So those are the difficult things to talk about in situations like this. But I'm going to be going and visiting a book club coming up. I said reading group because that's what I used to teach, was reading groups. But they'll all have read the book, and I can talk about exactly why certain things happened the way they did.
Well, yeah, and I think also it goes back to the point of what kind of books you're writing. I mean, you're writing books about life and real life characters, and part of what you're writing about is how do people deal with things like grief and loss, and those are things that all, whether we want to or not, we're dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not just, for the sake of like knocking someone off.
Right.
It's
not just
so
for
the
fun of it.
characters have some depth to them.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so yeah, so if you want to read a book that nothing ever goes wrong and everybody's happy all the time, that's fantasy, and that's an escape, right? Nothing happens bad in this book, and that's nothing wrong with those kind of books, but they don't necessarily have the richness of the actual experiences that
Right.
people actually have. So
Right. And I will say too, with that, for me, one of my other things that I wanted to make sure of, what I want when people read one of my books is they close the book and they go, that was a good story. And there's a feeling of encouragement and hope and hopefully a desire to call a friend or maybe get in touch with a family member or say a prayer, or, you know, do something in their community. So there's 5 relationships. I'm hoping that in some subtle sense that it's encouraging people to pay attention to those. And so I don't want a dark, unhappy ending. They will all, it might not be happy ending, but it's gonna make, you're gonna feel good at the end of it is my goal. I don't, you know, there's enough dark in the world. I don't need to add to that.
That's a requirement my wife on every show we watch. She has to feel happy at the end.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm with you.
I understand why you did the one character because of the end of the book
Yeah.
and how. So now talking to you, it makes
more sense. Yeah.
All right. Anybody else have a question? I mean, you'll have some time to interact.
Yeah,
after.
okay.
Is it possible to get a hold of that first book and read it? You said there's like 15 copies.
Yeah,
right now.
I printed
Maura has one.
15. I'm not sure where.
She
Yeah,
could-
where
she
they
could
are.
run-
They.
Maura, can you do it?
Nancy had one.
No, she has Iris and Matt.
You have a copy, right? I read it. I read
Yeah,
it.
you have a
And
copy.
then-
I have one. I have one to my that
You
I
can lend it
have.
to us, Sue, right?
But
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, that book's funny because
So you created a lot of interest with this book.
I
though.
know.
See, now you wish you could publish it because now everybody's like, I want to read that.
Yeah.
yeah,
This is Marilyn Blair's
I
first
just
book.
given it to people who had asked me, who knew I was writing, and they had asked me about it, you know, during the course of that. So I just printed just a few. Actually, it was Maura's fault because I was not going to let anybody read it, and she's the one. You're the one, Miss Maura.
What?
I'm talking about you.
Sorry.
It was your fault that they got printed because you said.
Yeah, and you gave me a paper copy first.
Yeah, and she's like, you need to let other people read this. I'm like, I don't think so. And then she kept saying, yes, you do. I'm like, okay, fine. So that's why I printed just the 15, and I kept one, and I gave just a couple, whoever, you know, I know I gave one to you guys, right? So just a few family and friends who had been asking, like, what are you up to? I want to read this. Since then, it has been passed around. The latest I heard, the farthest it's gone is Chicago to the west, and it's been up in Maine. And I'm like, can I have them all back? Because nobody was supposed to read this, you know. And when you're in Maine, you're getting really close to Nova Scotia, so I'm like, you're gonna get me in trouble. But anyway,
you were a technical writer, correct?
pretty much, yeah.
Has that helped with the writing process for you?
It has helped with the publishing process. So here's the interesting, another little fun fact, right? When I got down to the point where I'm ready to publish Iris and Mo, and I knew how to do almost everything I needed to do, except for I couldn't edit my own book. I had to get somebody to edit. But other than that, from cover to all the stuff that goes inside the book, I could do. And the reason I could do it is because of all the other jobs that I had previous to that just built on this. And, you know, I had my little Esther moment where I was like, oh, for such a time like as this, you know, God has been preparing me all this time, and I didn't know that. And maybe, you know, it wasn't just to be a writer. I was doing other good things for him, you know, in that whole process. But boy, when I look at the skill set that I have, not a lot of writers can do both. And so it's really been interesting to do that. And so, yeah, it was a big help.
Anybody else?
I told you I was going to be ready for you.
That's good questions.
One more?
Do you, so like when you're taking a trip that's not to Eastport, are you always thinking about the books and the characters? When you're not actively writing? Because
When I'm not
there was a
actively- yeah.
period between Iris and Mo, right? And
Actually, so the books, they layer themselves. So when I'm writing the manuscript part of it, I look at it as I'm using my right brain completely, or that creative side of my brain. I can't think anything else because I'm doing that. When I get to the publishing side, now I flip to my left side. That frees up all this space on this side, and that allows the other characters in the next book to start talking to me.
I thought you would say that.
Yeah, and that's what they do. And so For instance, book number 3, I can tell you exactly the day I started writing that. It was the Friday before Thanksgiving last year, 4 o'clock in the morning. Frank and his brother Will woke me up talking, and I'm like, boys, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. I would like to be sleeping now, thank you very much. And 5 minutes later, I'm in my living room writing, because I've learned by this point, when they're talking to me in the middle of the night, they're not going to shut up until I get up. So 2 hours later, I had written that first draft of the first chapter of the book.
And then were you able to go through the rest of your day?
I had
Distracted
to.
by them?
Yeah, I usually, if I can get it out, they'll leave me alone for a little bit, and then it'll just start building up again, and it'll come and go. This third book, it's just an odd, you know, the first chapter was disturbing and disturbed me for a couple months, and then and I just keep, like I said, I keep going back to it. But the same thing happened with Iris and Mom. When I finished that and I was publishing it, I started writing A Good Place to Turn Around. So they just kind of layer on top of each other. Yeah, but when I do go other places, it doesn't matter where I am. You know, if they're talking to me, they're talking to me. But I'm more cognizant of, wow, that's an interesting sunrise, or that's an interesting, setting that I might be able to use, or I see a situation and go, ooh, I could use that, and I'll write these things down.
And do the men in the Waco diner, do they know what you're doing?
I have a feeling now they do, because they're actually.
That's who that was.
They're actually in book 2. I didn't put all of them in there, and of course I changed their names. But the people in Eastport don't know exactly who they are. And so they're in the book. And I actually posted a picture of just the back of them recently, so I would not be surprised if they know I'm waiting till. And one of the guys who's usually there is the former owner, and his name's Bob. And Bob has his son now owns it. He and his partner own it. And so Bob's well aware, and I've met Bob several times, and so he sees me coming and just kind of gives me the.
When's the third book gonna be published?
I'm shooting for. I would love for it to be August of next year. I'm shooting for September, but it's gonna be a while. It takes me 9 months. Seems to be pretty consistent on just doing the rough draft. And then the rest of the time is editing and revising and then getting ready to publish. So it's all about an hour and a half, a year and a half from start to finish. But, if I count last Thanksgiving, it's already been almost a year before I go. So I'm hoping, because that book, I actually know what happens, that it'll go a little faster once I get over this beginning hump, because really the problem is it starts when Frank's a teenager, and it's going to go all the way up to when Iris knocks on his door to rent the house. He's a landlord, and so he's in his 60s at that point, so trying to jump time is a little tricky.
It sounds like you've enjoyed the whole process.
I have, which is shocking. I mean, because if you had any idea how much I did not want to write when this all started, how sick of writing I was, the idea that, what I say frequently is I get to do this now, and I just so surprised I feel that way. But it's so different from everything else I've done. It's just completely different animal. But yeah, I do enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. They're fun people.
There's nobody in there my age.
Well, I don't know.
I'm still here.
You are still
Mary.
here. Mary. Yeah.
Is
Mary.
she 82?
Her age is unknown, but it wouldn't surprise me if she was
Make
in
her
her
82.
80s. She's 82.
Let's don't kill her off.
Yeah. I'm not going to kill her off.
Yeah, over the late 35.
Don't kill me. That's what the voices are saying. Don't kill me. I want to be in the next book.
But I say be careful, because stuff that, you never know when you're going to show up in the book. So.
Yeah. All right,
Yeah.
well, you'll be around for a few minutes
I
after.
will.
And why don't we give Marilyn a hand?
Thank you for coming, by the way, you know, and one thing I do want to say, just, you know, this church has been such a supporter of mine from the time I came here as a junior in high school, and it really has been, you know, we talk about DVCC family, and you know, from the people who were here when I was a junior and the people that are here now, it's not a lot of the same people, you know, people move and all that, but the thing that has not changed is that DVCC family feeling. And I can always count on encouragement and support. And, you know, Sue's been here almost as long as I have, if not 94, so it's been a long time too.
30 years.
Yeah, so it's been a long time. And Carrie and I have known each other since high school. I was in high school. Yeah, so, yeah.
Well, let me pray for you and for God to continue to use the books. And as you know, many people read them that need to know the Lord, and others, you know, just encouragement. And God will guide you in this next process with the next book. So let's pray. Father, we thank you so much for this time. We thank you for just being able to hear the way that you have led Marilyn through this process. And even as we listen to her story, we know that you, for each of us, Lord, there are things that you call us to step out in faith and to just trust you that you will guide us. And we thank you for the way that it's clear you've guided Marilyn. And we thank you for these books and the characters. And we thank you that many, many people are helped by, not just entertained, but also helped by reading about the story of these lives. And Lord, we do pray for those that read the books and need to have a relationship with you, that your Holy Spirit would use these books as a planting of a seed in of faith in their hearts. And pray for Marilyn as she works on this next book, and guide her. We thank you for Jim and Holly and Kimmy and all those in her family that encourage her as well. And we thank you for each one that was able to come out tonight. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.